This is the Mathematics Education Podcast from mathedpodcast.com. Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. My name is Sam Otten from the University of Missouri, and today I am back at my undergraduate institution, Grand Valley State University, and I'm speaking with two of my former professors, Dave Coffey and John Golden. Dave, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you.
And John as well.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking about some alternative outlets for sharing ideas and thinking about mathematics education. So on this podcast, if you listen frequently, you'll know that I usually recruit a guest who has recently published something in a peer-reviewed journal, and we speak about their study that has been published in those journal outlets. But there are some other outlets and ways of sharing, and in some ways I think there's some advantages to these alternative outlets. So we'll get into a conversation about those, particularly blogging as a way to share mathematics thinking and communicate ideas with the field. But before we get to that conversation, I want to ask you each where you did your graduate studies and who you worked with there at your graduate institution.
So I was just on the road at Western Michigan University. My dissertation advisor was Christine Brownie, and I looked at sort of the intersection of math assessments and beliefs about what it means to do mathematics.
Mm-hmm. John?
I was at Penn and Penn State with Nigel Hickson in mathematics, not math education.
Okay, sure. And then when did you make the transition towards math education?
Kind of between graduating and being hired here.
So one way that I've been able to stay in touch with you since I left Grand Valley is through your blogs. So Dave Coffey blogs at deltascape.blogspot.com, and John has a blog at mathhombre.blogspot.com, where you share ideas from your undergraduate teaching, things that you're doing with pre-service teachers, mathematical ideas that you have, reaction pieces to something that you've seen from other people. But I want to go back to the beginning. When was it and how was it that you started to think about blogging or microblogging?
Maria Anderson used to run a terrific math technology camp kind of in the summer at Muskegon Community College. And while I was at that, she taught how to use Snagit and Camtasia and other things to kind of support math teaching, mostly for university and community college faculty. But I was talking about the challenges of keeping in touch with our student teachers.
Oh, yeah.
And having some idea of what was going on with them day to day.
Mm-hmm.
We had seminar once a week, but that wasn't enough to kind of have an idea of really what was going on in their classrooms. And she suggested Twitter, which I thought was absolutely absurd.
Mm-hmm. And around what year was this? Twitter was still pretty early on.
Oh boy,
2007.
Okay. So goodness, it might have been 10 years by this point. So it was around then. I think my first tweet was like, "It's hard to see this amounting to anything." But it turned out to be a really nice way to keep in touch with students. And then as I entered more into Twitter, I started coming into contact with other math teachers. It was the early days of blogging, and there were some great early blogs. Math Teacher Mambo, I remember Shireen, Jonathan Clayton, and then people who are kind of famous for it today, like Dan Meyer and Kate Nowak and Sam Shaw. And that got me to start blogging. And at first I was just thinking of it as a way to kind of curate.
Mm-hmm.
I'd preserve links to things that I found that I liked. And then that led to also kind of curating my own activities and sharing things with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I think about it, it must have been around 2010, 2011, because I think my first blog posts were in 2011, and I know John started before I did, I think maybe by at least a semester or a year. And one of the things that I was interested about it when John first shared with me what Maria had talked about was this was an opportunity. John and I did a lot of co-teaching together, and there was always this sense of the pre-service teachers didn't get a chance to see that piece of the teaching, right? They saw the implementation, but they rarely saw the planning.
Mm-hmm. Or the debriefing.
Or maybe. The debriefing, or those sorts of things. And so while John and I are two offices apart, and I'd walk over, he'd walk to my office, and we'd have those conversations, I thought this was a way to make our thinking public, so that I honestly didn't think anybody besides maybe our students would ever see it, but this was a chance for me to send some ideas to John, or to, like you said, debrief afterwards, to really represent what the entire process of teaching was like. And I saw blogging initially as doing that same thing. A lot of times in our classes there aren't resources available, and it felt like, well, instead of writing a textbook, I could write a blog, and those would be resources that my students could have access to. And again, maybe some of the sort of the first open source textbooks kind of ideas for me.
So when I think about some of the blog posts I've read at both of your sites, sometimes it will be something that you've read or seen in, the field of math education, and then you can give your own reactions or thoughts, and sometimes it's just a way to process what you saw. But you also have posts that are mathematical activities that you've tried, or here's a good problem. But the nice thing is you don't necessarily just put the math problem on there. You'll sometimes share student work. You'll tell the story of how this idea came up when I did it with students, and this was how we talked about it. And so you can get a little bit of an idea for an activity that somebody might do, but also a little bit of insight into how it played out for you and how you thought about handling it. Are there other types of blog posts that you've made, or do they all kind of fit into one of those types of categories?
If you had a kind of miscellaneous or goofball category, then that would probably encapsulate it. Written math fiction, or put math art up. Sometimes I put guides to using math software like GeoGebra, Desmos, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We've done some math memes. I mean, there are some things just to have fun.
Teaching hard!
Yes. Avengers Talk teaching, those sorts of things. I think that one of the ideas behind, so like I said, it started with me doing it to have, as John said, curate some ideas that I wanted to make sure that my students had access to. And again, that was my first audience, was my students. It then got to the point when I saw some of the feedback and the connections that I was making, that there was also this opportunity to do, and I'll probably get hate mail or hate tweets for this, but it was about lesson study. Right? I was putting lessons out there, and I was looking for feedback on it.
Right.
And so it was an opportunity to see what other people thought, what other people were doing, and improve the lesson there. And what I found is, as I was going farther into that became more of my focus. I wanted to share what I was doing, but also to get feedback on that. And then, as you said, there were those opportunities where there was something that was being said or written about that we felt like we needed to address and respond to. And it was something that we could respond to immediately and not have to go through a process. But there were also, I think one of them, I was also able to share, you mentioned students' work, but I was also working with grad students, and some of the action research that they were doing, I was able to share that as well. And again, I could have sat down and written that up and gone through the peer review, but then it's behind a paywall. And what we also, I think, are both pretty adamant about is that we want, teachers particularly to have access to the work that we're doing.
Yeah, that's a big feature. Thinking about this, one of the other things at the beginning, Dave's very good at encouraging kind of holistic practice. So the idea of that we're engaged in the kind of learning that we want our students to be engaged in. Right. And we encourage our students to write because we know it's good for learning, right? They consolidate, they formulate, they're able to kind of pose what comes next. Blogging was a place where I did that, where I wasn't finding that I was doing it anywhere else. So it really made me reflect on my teaching in a different way. So it didn't even matter if nobody saw it or nobody responded. It was really just kind of a motivation to write to learn.
Mm-hmm. That brings us into some of the benefits and drawbacks, and I want to ask you about that for blogging. And I've been recently thinking about the benefits and drawbacks of this kind of open sharing of ideas, and the internet is wonderful for this kind of thing, versus submit to a journal, the editor sends it out to some reviewers, you wait 5-6 months, you get feedback from the reviewers, then you maybe send it out again. And I just had an activity that I wrote with my brother about systems of learning equations. So this was kind of a nice idea. We thought this is a good activity. It helps some conceptual understanding and discussions happen. So we wanted to share it, and we decided to go the journal route through Mathematics Teacher. And it took about 2.5 years to come out for anybody else to see it, when it's just a little activity that you might do for one day of class, which seems kind of ridiculous in the 21st century for anything to take that long to share an idea. So John mentioned that blogs have this benefit of you can engage in your self-study kind of reflection that helps your own learning. A drawback of journal publishing is just the length of time that it might take, and then when it's published, it might cost $45 for somebody to actually get access to it. So those are a couple. What are other benefits that you see for blogging? Or then we can get into some drawbacks of blogging as well, so it's not like blogging is perfect. And drawbacks.
So the community aspect is what's become kind of the biggest aspect to me. That, you know, by kind of engaging in this kind of vulnerable practice where you're asking other people's comment or at least observation of what you're doing, that you enter into community with them. Mm-hmm. And the Math Twitter blogosphere has become a very important part of my professional life. It supports me in working with pre-service teachers, supports me when I'm in the classroom, working directly with K-12 students. I literally learn things every day, you know, from the teachers we interchange with on there.
So to support the community is part of it because of the comment boards and the fact that people respond directly, and that's part of blogging culture, is that you do respond and engage in conversation. But is it also that, do you feel more vulnerable when you put up a blog post? Like, you can put something up there that's imperfect, whereas if you were going to submit it to a journal, do you feel like you basically want to clean it up and have it be more polished?
Right.
And that sort of maybe closes you off to as many interactions because it's your polished product that you're putting forward instead of more like your raw thoughts that you're putting out there?
It could be. Something I need to work on in my professional practice is more of the journal type writing. But the other thing is the language of it is different. Mm-hmm. You know, so blogging to me, the immediacy, as you talked about, fits a lot more with what I think about situated practice. You know, I'm not pretending that this is a lesson that everyone should use, mm-hmm. or that it would be the same for everyone, or that the learning gains would be the same. Instead, I'm sharing my story of it. Mm-hmm. And then it's fascinating. Some of these lessons that get taught in many places, like Barbie Bungee, mm-hmm. it becomes just fascinating reading all the different experiences that students, teachers have with it.
Yeah, I think about it also differently. I mean, both of you I've talked to about sort of this design thinking in education avenue that I'm taking. And I see blogging as being prototyping, where it allows open space for other people to be able to make adjustments. When I've written for journals, it feels much more like I'm trying to present something that's whole cloth, that's not meant to be changed. Yeah. That's not the case. I would hope anybody who reads any of my stuff is looking at it and saying, oh, how could I use this in my classroom? But it just has a different feel, especially when it's going through that formal process of review and revision that we're trying to get to something else. And I've appreciated having that white space that allows people to say, well, I do this differently. It almost invites it. Mm-hmm. I would also say, and I think you did some numbers on this before, John, that there's probably a better likelihood that my blog gets seen than something I've written for one of the journals, especially one of the ones that's behind a paywall.
Right. Last year, or maybe it was a year and a half ago now or so, I did a quick YouTube video because I had kind of some reactions to a Common Core debate that was happening. And I'm positive that YouTube video got more eyeballs on it than anything I've written so far in journals. Yeah. With YouTube or with blogs or with Twitter, you're tapping into something that people use on a daily basis, and they're used to consuming information and engaging with information that way.
And I think that's an important piece too. I might get one of the journals in the mail, and it's going to sit there. If I'm reading a blog, I'm actively looking for that blog. It's something. It's not just because it popped up. Mm-hmm. I'm more often. It may pop up in my Twitter stream, and it looks like something I'd be interested in doing. But there's a lot more active engagement than I don't know. Does that make sense? That the journal seems just a lot more static.
I think so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about drawbacks, though? So, to blogging, are there some limitations or some things that you do get frustrated by?
Sometimes things are embarrassingly unpolished. You publish things really before they're ready to be shared, but humility is a good thing. So sometimes that works out with that.
For me, it's really about being able to get into sort of a rhythm, and for a variety of reasons, I've gotten out of that rhythm recently, and I found it difficult to get back in. I was pretty good about, for a while, publishing once a week something,
Mm-hmm.
which probably also got into why we were doing some silly stuff too, because it was once a week and I was trying to do that. I was trying to do that once a week, and I was also trying, using some like design thinking ideas, saying I was only going to spend an hour and then it was going to be published. And I could always go back and revise it later, but
Mm-hmm.
but I was going to try to maintain to that.
Mm-hmm.
And getting out of that habit, it's interesting how difficult it is to get back into it.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself falling back more into, wait, this isn't ready to publish, whereas I'd gotten to the very,
Mm-hmm.
what does it matter kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that timing, I think, getting back into that routine has been difficult for me, and I recognize not everybody has the same amount of time that John and I have. I think on the other end, and you brought up the Common Core, it's not just necessarily the blogging from our perspective, but it's all the other people who are blogging, and we do want our students to be aware of what's out there, the good stuff, all of the stuff, but we also want them to be critical consumers of that. And what happens, especially some of our pre-service teachers who come in and have read something about, what was the Common Core one about Johnny?
Letter from a parent.
A letter from a parent.
Oh, yeah.
And they have a real sense that that's what the Common Core is, and it takes effort, and it's well worth it. I think that effort is well worth it, but it takes effort to be able to say, well, wait a minute, that's not what the Common Core says, and pull out and actually do some deep reading, some close reading of what the Common Core does say. I have now got a PDF of page 5 of the Common Core to say what it is and what it isn't.
Right.
That I share with my
It's not an instructional program.
Exactly. It's not a curriculum. It's not. Yeah. And in fact, there's some really strong language in there that it trusts teachers to make instructional decisions about order that they do the work in, the order that they attend to the standards in, or even how they combine those standards.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been a powerful piece for me. That's often ignored.
Yeah, the kind of very democratic nature of the blogosphere also means that it's not coherent, right? So especially you see people wanting to use it kind of as a curriculum to find, that's where they're going to find their lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a coherence to it. The NCTM recently had a letter that was kind of warning against that, although perhaps in overblown terms. Right? But and so some of the important work that's being done now, I think, is using those materials to build something that's coherent. And use in open educational resources like illustrative math really stands out to me. And then informal things like Sam Shah's virtual file cabinet, to really organize things like Jeff Crowell's problem-based learning curriculum maps.
Emergent math, I used a lot of that work in an algebra course that I just taught. So.
And Dan Meyer is so good at kind of adding on that layer of organization with like the collection of 3-act math tasks, or he just kind of thinks that way. I think that's the way he approaches things, is how to build structure.
One drawback that people would probably cite is the lack of peer review, because like you were saying, you can post something up there, it can be not quite polished yet or whatever, and so they might say, well, then you end up with maybe some garbage posts or some ideas that aren't worth very much, but somebody put it up there because they have a blog. But what I've noticed in consuming blogs and reading them is that I notice it seems like the peer review happens after the fact instead of before. So it happens in the comment board where people would say, like, this post really misses an important point, or here's a different way that you could have done this. And that's sort of it's from a peer reviewing what you've written, but it's actually public peer review that's after you've shared your thinking, instead of the peer review that's like a gateway that you have to pass through before you are allowed to share it to the field.
Yeah, and within peer review sources, that's not a guarantee of quality. There's fantastic stuff like your and Drew's piece.
Thank you.
And that's not empty flattery. I really liked your approach to it, and kind of the exhibition of team, team play between university and high school. But there are things that appear in the practitioner journals that you wonder, what was the context where this worked?
Well, and I'm hoping that one of the things that we're doing at the university is helping teachers, pre-service teachers, again, to be these consumers that can make the necessary adjustments. So I just gave you 3 books that I said, I couldn't recommend these books. They were published. They went through a process. But I would want to make sure that teachers who were using them were using them appropriately and using them for their students. So whether my students, when they become teachers and are out in the classroom and are using a curriculum, or they're using a blog, or they're using Pinterest. I don't, in each of those cases, what I'm hoping is that they have gone through enough work with us that they have been critical consumers and are able to make the necessary adjustments that work for them and for their students. I don't think any of these should be just taken and used. So, but there is that issue of being, is everyone prepared to be able to make those necessary adjustments?
I'm speaking with Dave Coffey and John Golden at Grand Valley State University. I wonder if you could share with our listeners your favorite blog post.
So I shared that a lot of times I'm also sharing my grad students' blog posts. So one of the favorites is one that was several years ago, where I was, again, using some design thinking principles, and we were looking at issues that were coming up in the classroom. And one of the teachers was saying, I'm so frustrated with their assessments because all they want to do is give me the answer. I want to know what they're thinking, but they're just giving me the answer. The answers are on the test. Well, I don't care about the answers. I care about their thinking. And from that, we got to the point where we said, well, what would happen if we gave them the answer key? And so he did a little research study where he gave them, instead of giving them a typical test, he gave them a test that had the answers on it and asked them to write, how do you think these answers came about? And he said he got a whole lot of different perspective from what the students thought because of that. And to the point also that there were some students who liked it because in the past there had been so much anxiety about getting the right answer, they no longer had to worry about that. So that blog post was one that I often share as an example of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Sam warned us that this question was coming, and it's so hard to pick because so many blog posts are written for different reasons. But definitely Dave and I share the experience of Mystery Teacher Theater 3000 or 2000.
2000.
Can't even remember my own acronym. And that kind of pulled us into the MIT-Boss as we play acted with terrible video recording and audio quality, people sarcastically responding to a Sal Khan video. It started out of classroom practice though.
Yeah, so my students, we were looking at different ways of teaching integer computation and the rules that are essentially go along with that. And so we were looking at several different resources that were available for that. Sal Khan was one of those. I mean, it had keep coming up. So I asked them to watch all 3 different, I won't even mention who the other ones were, but I asked them to watch all 3 of them, and we could not get through the Khan Academy video without them going, what? I mean, and I told John afterwards, I said it was like an episode of Mystery Science Theater. And John and I had also been very interested in trying some improv, so we figured this would be, so none of that was written out. I said it was all, it was an attempt to sort of combine those things. And then, as you were saying, one of the things that I think both of us see as a role of blog is response to, and there was an article, I think it was in USA Today, that set me over the edge, and I said, John, let's do this.
Yeah, and we still generate, I think it must be one of the most disliked videos on YouTube in terms of ratio of thumbs downs to thumbs ups. And we get to 1 or 3 comments a week about what jealous imbeciles we are.
But didn't you kind of get the last laugh because didn't Sal Khan end up revising that exact video that you commented on?
Almost immediately the video came down.
Yeah. The only place I think you can see the video is if you watch our video.
Which is the punishment fitting the crowd.
So Dave Coffey's blog is deltascape.blogspot.com. John Golden's at mathhomebread.blogspot.com. You're also on Twitter if you want to give your Twitter handles.
Delta_DC.
At mathhomebread.
And I want to ask one final question. So I ask all my guests to imagine an alternative career. So if you weren't in math education and if you weren't just a full-time online blogger, What would you see as a possible alternative career for yourself?
Wait, was that blogger thing? Is that an option?
When I was young, what I always wanted to do, and I guess I think I still do this to some cases, be a storyteller. I wanted to write stories, to write fiction. I always thought that was just an amazing, people who could do that just were amazing to me, and I tried doing it, but could never get past 20 pages or something, and then feel like it was just derivative of something else that I'd written or read. So I, having done another book, a dissertation, which ended up being about 300 pages, and
wow.
sometimes I think I could go back and maybe try something like that again. But
I'd love to see it. We're trying to encourage him right now to write a book on education as seen by Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, I'd love those. I'd love to see how would it. How could you teach Calvin and Hobbes? Would love to show the comic strip and then talk about what are some of the teaching practices that Miss Wormwood does that's positive or maybe might want to change.
I call dibs on playing Miss Wormwood.
Oh, okay. All right. We get into that.
So I was very close to being an astrophysicist instead of a mathematician. I loved cosmology. My backup plan my whole youth was to be a clown if the academic stuff didn't work out.
Okay.
And
you haven't been dabbling in that recently, have you? I think I maybe heard about that.
Have you heard what you do if you're approached by a pack of clowns?
No.
You go for the juggler. Sorry.
You'll add in the rim shot.
Yeah,
I'll put in the whole laughter.
rim shot. So art. I love to draw and paint, and so that'd be great to do.
Tag team wrestling too.
Tag team wrestling.
Well, we'll have to have another entry to the YouTube channel if you do that and get some more downvotes, probably.
I had some students who try to win free tickets this past semester to a wrestling event. Did a whole mathematically themed wrestling video. It was spectacular.
Nice.
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to speak about this topic. I think it's really fascinating, and I do think it has a lot to offer the field as a counterpoint to going through the formal process. So thanks for sharing your insights on that.
It's a real treat to be on the podcast. I totally feel like I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy, and I love the work you're doing as you get researchers to relate. You're giving them some of that blogging experience about doing the think aloud about where did the research come from. That's a very valuable service.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And congratulations for being our alumni in residence.
Yay.
Very happy to be here. It's been a wonderful visit. So
Good.
nice talking to you.
Yep,
Thank you.